All right. We have a good amount of people coming in. I know they're still coming in, but we'll go ahead and at least start our introductions and some housekeeping. But thanks for taking your time to meet with us today. We are presenting on our ABA onboarding dashboard and advanced BI and how you can utilize that at your organization. So your hosts today are Yukki. She is our Director of Product Management on our data and analytics vertical here at Central Reach. She has really taken on creating additional dashboards for all of you guys. Loves meeting with you, learning more from you guys on these webinars about what's needed. So we're so lucky to have Yukki here today to talk us through that dashboard. And then I will be answering questions in the chat. I'm Katie. I'm a solutions consultant here at Central Reach, and I work on our data and analytics product as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Hopefully, you're having a great summer so far. Okay, so for today's agenda, as usual, we have a pretty packed agenda, so want to kind of get right into some of the content. First, we're going to look at why are we even trying to create this whole new data set as well as a new dashboard that we call ABA Client Onboarding, and we'll give you some kind of high-level information in terms of what question are we really trying to answer here. Then we'll go into the usual kind of little bit about the data definition. Like what data are we really pulling? How are we pulling those data? How can you make sure that you're setting up your data correctly so that everything will flow into the dashboard just flawlessly? And then we'll go into some of the metric calculation so you know exactly oh, this is what this metric means. Then at the end, we'll end the call with a demo, a live demo with the dashboard itself. I will give you some kind of tips and tricks or some of the experience that from other organizations who have been using it, what they found really useful, how do they utilize it, especially with all the different widgets, all the different graphs, how they interact together could potentially be really helpful. A little bit background, when we are looking at this new dashboard, what are we really trying to accomplish here? One of the things is when we talk about client onboarding, it is really all about your waitlist. We want to track two major milestones as the client start doing the inquiry with your organization. First is first assessment, and then the next one is about direct therapy. And then from there, we want to then be able to see okay, what is the average time to therapy or average time to assessment? So there's different time frame, different timeline that we can start measuring and really see how much time does it take for each of the client, going through the whole process. And then from there, we want to kind of start seeing okay, if we, kind of slice and dice the information and see okay, do we see different location, assuming if you have multiple different office location, is there specific location that have a longer wait list or shorter wait list or even payer, knowing that a lot of time payer could be a big factor into it. Certain payer just taking longer, harder to get authorization, and without authorization you cannot really start your direct therapy. So we want to be able to show all this insight to you. And then from there, of course, eventually, what is the ultimate goal is to hope that we can really show you the all the information how potentially you can improve this process and be able to streamline it so that the patient satisfaction and then the delivery of care can really be improved. So with that, let's talk a little bit about okay, what kind of data are we including here? Okay, so here is a screenshot on some sample information, and I'm going to walk you through in detail in each single one, how we get it. First, since, as the dashboard imply, this is first all about ABA services. And so we take in all the service code that with the service type apply behavior analysis. And that is the only service code that we're taking. You probably will ask, wait, so what happened if I have OT, PT, and speech? Don't worry about it. We have a plan for you, and we're going to come back at the end of this webinar, and I'm going to give you a quick sense in terms of what is our enhancement coming up for those other services. But first, let's focus on ABA. And as we mentioned earlier, we want to first look at what is your assessment, when do you get your first assessment, and when do you get your first direct therapy. And then how do we come up with all the status? There are 4 status that we're tracking. One is saying it is done. or it is unconverted, or is scheduled or not scheduled. And here the flow chart here show you the logic that we're using. First, we look at your billing entry, basically your work hours. And then we're trying to figure out like, okay, do we see any service code that is being billed for this client that with the service type that's ABA as well as the service category that is assessment. If we find anything, then that means it's done. If not, then we look at your scheduling data. We're trying to look at all the appointment, and then we look at the past first. So anything that is like prior to today. And if we see anything, then we'll say it is unconverted. At that point, it haven't been converted. We are not 100% sure if it's being done or there's something that haven't canceled on your appointment. But we want to indicate it for you. And then if we still don't see anything, then we start looking into the future and see like, hey, anything scheduled? And then if yes, then it will become the schedule. And then if really nothing, then all that I can tell is like, there's nothing that's being scheduled right now. So that's the 4 status that we're tracking, and we're tracking it separately for the assessment as well as for the direct therapy. And of course, for direct therapy, we look for the category, service code category that is direct therapy. In case you're new to ABI or you haven't used a lot of our dashboard, highly recommend you to categorize all your service code. I cannot even tell you at this point, I'm start losing track of like how many dashboard we're actually anchoring on that structure, no matter as a filter. So it'll give you the flexibility to look at no matter your, let's say your revenue or your cancellation by a specific type of services, or being able to calculate it. Let's say our supervision dashboard, we use that too. So highly recommend you to categorize all your service code. And if you have any question or if you need any help, please feel free to talk to your CSL. They are great resources for you. Okay, so the other thing that we also keep track of is what I call the initial client office location and payer. Because especially when you start looking at historical data, a client could very well like, first come in and come to location A and then later on go to location B, or similarly, first start with, Aetna as their payer, but then like later on change to United Healthcare. So we want to kind of look at what is initially when they first come through the pipeline, what do they have? And so what we do is we look at what they have when they first have direct therapy. If they haven't had their direct therapy yet, then we look at when they have their assessment. And if no assessment done yet, then we just use whatever that's current. So that's kind of like how we're keeping track of all those things. And then like even if they change their location or payer down the road, it won't impact your historical data. Okay, so with that, next, I want to show you another data point that we're capturing. As you can tell, there is the first direct therapy, first assessment status. There's 16 combination. This is quite a bit to keep track of. If I show you a graph with 16 different status, it will be quite overwhelming. So we have a combined status, what we call the client engagement status, which we combine them into 7 milestones. First is, when you don't have any assessment or any therapy schedule, then of course, ideally, then you have your assessment schedule, then it is unconverted, but no therapy schedule, completed your assessment, then we start going into the therapy. So like, okay, therapy is being scheduled, therapy is not converted, or therapy has started. So that means it's done. So that is kind of the 7 status. And we on purpose actually really put the number in front of it. So when you plot any graph or look at any kind of table, it will be in this exact order, because this is kind of like linearly how we want to kind of look at the whole milestone for each of the client. Okay, now we explain all the status. Let's talk about the metric. So besides status, we also want to look at the average time to therapy. So there's 3 key kind of day that we are keeping track of in our system. One is the creation day. So that's, we at this point has to kind of assume the creation day is when the client start their inquiry to you. And then we have the first ABA assessment day, as well as the direct therapy day. And then from there, we'll be able to say the day 2 first assessment, the day 2 direct therapy, as well as how long does it take between assessment to direct therapy. So be able to keep track of all this. When we look at this, remember we have the 4 status earlier. When we calculate this in our data set, we only use the information when the status is unconverted, sorry, or complete. So like that means it's done. So that is the two status that we're taking into account. Really quick, before we kind of dive into the dashboard, as I mentioned earlier, we have planned to expand all this into other services. So your OT, PT, speech, mental health, and not just ABA. So we'll have similar data set available in our kind of data table. And the other thing is we're building a new dashboard, be able to, it's slightly different from what we're showing today, but it basically gives you an overview in terms of like, hey, what is my service engagement coverage or like utilization across the board? So you'll be able to see like, if you believe 90%, 80% of your clients should all have speech therapy, you can easily see like everyone that start ABA, how many of them actually have speech therapy, how many of them don't have, and then be able to look at like the link of services for each of the different services that they are having. So when this dashboard right now, we're targeting Q3, so the current quarter to be released. And once it is released, please join us in our Spotlight webinar. Then we'll give you a more overview in terms of what we're going to cover over there. Okay, so now let me pause here a little bit and see if there's any question. Is there anything that we need to look at?
Yes. So Omar is asking, when you say categorizing service codes, what do you mean?
Okay, perfect. Yep. So for each of your service code under billing, and give me 1 second, I can show you the screen in a minute. There is a categorization that you can put in. So here, let me show you. Okay, let me share my screen again. Okay, so here, this is just our test environment. So probably some of the code may not make the most sense, but let's say if I go into one of the 97153, and you see here, there's a different many different setup, and here, so service type. So within this is where you can pick which type of therapy it is. And then like, right now we're looking for ABA. In the future, we're going to start looking at like OT, PT, and others. And then here is the category. So direct therapy assessment that we have mentioned before, our supervision dashboard look at the supervision. So this is also allow you to look at like dashboard, like for filtering as well.
Thanks, Yukki.
So,
We do have a couple other questions, but they're more on customization. So I might hold off on those until towards the end, if that's okay.
yep, definitely.
Perfect.
Okay, so in this case, let's dive into the dashboard, and then we will have more time at the end to talk about some of the other questions. Okay, so this is the usual kind of ABI landing page. If you don't have access to all the dashboard, contact your admin. If you're admin already or you have a designer license, if you see anything that is missing, please talk to your CSL. We want to make sure by default you should have everything, but once in a while we'll see something missing. Not very often, but just in case, then contact your CSL. They will be able to basically give you access to those dashboards. The dashboard that we'll look at today is the client ABA onboarding, which is happened to be the first one. One thing that I do want to mention, if you hover over to the iBubble, here have a full description of the dashboard as well as some of the high-level questions that we're trying to answer here, as well as the link to our help content. I know, as we have been doing a lot of improvement, a lot of enhancement, sometimes it can get a little bit overwhelming now in terms of like, hey, I see another new dashboard. What is this doing? Like, how is that going to help me? So all those information could potentially be helpful. And then if you go into the help article link, which I have it open here, it have all the information, similar information that we just walked through. So of course, you can always get the recording and then like listen to it again if you forget anything, but those are very good, helpful information for you for all the other dashboard as well. Okay, so now let's kind of go into our dashboard. In the meantime, I'm gonna like, in case you don't know, you can actually hide your left-hand menu. So it will make it bigger, especially sometime if you work with a smaller screen. Okay, as usual, on the right-hand side, we'll have our filter. So our filter have, the day based on the client creation day. Right now, I'm looking at this in the last 3 quarters. Since we're just at the beginning of Q3, so you're basically looking at like a 9 to 10 months of data. And then like you can look at it like by the location, by the payer, as well as the client status. So if you do disable your client once for whatever reason, they left the wait list or they left the organization, then you can use that to filter down the client that you're interested in looking at. And then the other thing is you can also look at it by the status that we just talked about, as well as by the client label. Okay, so let's go back to the dashboard itself. The dashboard have two parts. Part one is all about the status. So, we basically give you different way of looking at the status by different area, which we'll go through in a second. And then part two is going to be looking at like the time to therapy that we talk about. So let's go back to part one. And you see in this case, again, this is kind of test data. So in case you're like, wait, some of it doesn't make sense, I apologize upfront. But we basically have 27 new clients that join us in this period of time. And then you can see the breakdown by how many of them have not started direct therapy. And when it's not start, is it not scheduled or the schedule, but just coming up, or it's unconverted, or it is done. And then you will also be able to see in even more detail with the 7 status that we talked about earlier. If let's say, hey, who is the one that is unconverted? You can simply click into it and you see this table, then it will show you all the details. So you see Logan here, that's in the folder office, and then have Cigna. And the first assessment is on this day, and then the first direct therapy is on this day, which is pretty recent. So in this case, I would tend to believe that it is just something that you have not converted yet. And then if you clear this, then you'll be able again to look at like, okay, so saying like how long, like how many wait lists, how long is my wait list in each of the office, and then be able to look at it by payer as well. So especially if you start seeing a payer mix, or you have like a new office, new location opening up, or you're expanding capacity in certain location, this will be a good view for you to look at. And of course, you can always look at it in different day range. So let's say you're like, okay, I don't want to look at it like, such a long day range. I just want to look at like last quarter. And then so you can look at this and it will just adjust the information for you automatically. And then in part two, then you will be able to see the average day to first assessment as well as to the first direct therapy. So first direct therapy, now we're saying that like it is like 52 days. Keep in mind, in order to calculate this, obviously the client would have to start their direct therapy. In this case, we only have a sample size of 1. So it basically is the one that like is unconverted, because remember we use the status that is either unconverted or they have already complete their direct therapy. And so when we calculate the average day to first assessment, we have more sample size, but there's more people get their assessment already and haven't get their direct therapy. So sometimes do keep in mind, like, the sample size will be slightly different here. And then of course here, then we can calculate how many days does it take between assessment to direct therapy. I'm sure when you look at kind of your real data, you will be able to look at more like robust data and be able to slice it into different location potentially. And then like here, we also then want to kind of show you in terms of like the client that have or have not started their therapy, and then like be able to see like, okay, how long does it take? Since in this sample size, I only have like one office, so it look like there's only one bar. But then if you have multiple office, you will see different bar, and then the same thing for the payer. Then you'll be able to see it. The other thing that I also want to remind you, again, we try to make sure that like, if any key question that you need in order to understand the dashboard is also available within the dashboard, so you don't need to go to so many different places to hunt down the information. So all the information is also at the bottom as well. And if you have any other kind of question, more additional question you have, then you can always go into a help article. So that is the first draft of our onboarding, which is looking at your waitlist. And then when we have our multi-D one, so which is for like other therapy, we can have similar conversation, and I can walk you through the detail over there. Okay, Katie, do we have any question?
We do, we do. So let me see, which one do I want to ask first? Okay. The first question I have is about statuses that are maybe different from their company's needs. And they're asking how to change or add statuses. I'm not sure that we can necessarily change or add, but I'm thinking maybe label usage might be something we can explore there.
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, the status here is already kind of pre-calculate. If you want to, depending on like how you want to kind of break out, if there's like a certain one that like you want to break out finer, or like, oh, you know what, let's say you want to keep track of supervision too, the first time the supervision, since we don't have it here. Another thing that you could do is potentially use your label. So that's the contact label that you put on for each of your contact. You can use that, or potentially you can use metadata. Obviously, it's not going to be as convenient. That means you need to enter, a day. So let's say you have a metadata field, which is like one of the good example is if you don't create your client in Central Reach, right, when they do your inquiry, but only when you create them when they actually, ready to start the therapy, then this day may not be accurate, even though people still find this day to be really useful. So one of the things that you could potentially do is to put the true inquiry day in the metadata field. And then you can still, we actually did an enhancement, I want to say about 3-4 months ago on our metadata field to basically convert it into a day field. And a little bit of like the technical term. So once it is a day field, it's kind of like Excel. Then you can do something what we call a day diff. Then you can calculate the date yourself and be able to utilize it. So that's another way to kind of go around it potentially. Obviously, if you can use kind of the existing system that we have, then there's a lot of calculation just pre-calculate for you. It's just a little bit more convenient. And then like similarly, if there's other milestone that you want to keep track of, you could potentially use it in the metadata field. And then from there, then you can do all the calculation. And then like you can do some logic to put like status around it.
Awesome. Thank you, Yuki. I actually had someone ask a very similar question about the maybe tracking the delay between diagnosis and first
Mm.
assessment. So I think that metadata fix is a great option for that question as well. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. I don't think we have any other questions.
Okay,
Unless
perfect.
anyone else has any other questions, I'll pause for a second, but
Yeah. Before everyone leave, I do have one more quick pulse check for you. So like I want to do a quick pulse here. And the other thing that I also want to show the group is some of the, as you're answering the question, I want to also show you two initiatives that we are working on right now that we'd love to see if you want to get involved. Both of them is related to kind of AI initiative for ABI. So the first one that we are having in mind that we're exploring and testing right now is some kinds of summary for your dashboard. So imagine if you go into a dashboard and there's a button and you just click and magically give you a summary of that dashboard, kind of like an executive summary. So in this case, we have like, the authorization utilization dashboard, and then be able to kind of tell you some of the area that maybe you want to focus on. We'll love to get your input in terms of like fine-tuning this summary and getting, a better understanding what may be something that will be useful for you. Because at the end of the day, we want to have something that is really insightful for you, and we'd love to get your feedback. The other area that we are also exploring is a chatbot. Knowing that ABI, as we have been growing so much in the last year and a half, we basically on average are releasing at least like 1 to 2 dashboard every other month. It can get overwhelming. And sometimes you're like, wait, so what dashboard is for what? Like, do you have one that is for this? So we want to start having a chatbot to be able to help you. Like, if you have specific area, like, hey, I really want to know authorization, especially for utilization or visit-based authorization, where and which one should I look at, and be able to kind of like show you the link. And this will be available for you, all users. So it could be user that is not admin or like not the designer license user. So they may not have access to everything. So they can then know there's a dashboard that's available and be able to look at the help article and be able to get a high level sense like what it could do, and maybe kind of have a sense like, okay, is this going to be helpful for them? And if yes, then they can then like contact the admin and request access to it. So it's just like help to also spread the word in terms of like, there are lots of the organization will talk about like, hey, this is like, so hard to make sure everyone know what is coming and then give access to the right people and all that. So, help to kind of spread out the word a little bit. So this is the two initiatives that we want to explore in the second half of this year. If any one of you are interested in partnering with us, after the webinar, that is a post-webinar survey, there's a question there. Please let me know if you're interested, then we'll contact you and then we'll coordinate some time together and get your feedback. Awesome. And then the last thing that I want to mention here is, in case you don't know, we have our CL Unite coming up in September. Really exciting. This year, we're going to be in LA. We'd love to have you join us. If you want to learn more detail, please, here is a QR code or contact your CSL, your AM. I'm sure they will be able to give you more information. Awesome. Well, thank you so, so much for spending the last 30 minutes with me. Really appreciate it and hope you all have a very great summer.
Thank you, Yukki.
Thank you so much.